Hello, everybody. Welcome to Soul Empowerment. This is episode number 56, and today our topic title is Embrace the Weird. And of course, like we always do, we were having a little side discussion here before we turned on the recording, and naturally, everything we talked about was totally weird. And we're going to get really, really weird as we progress. But before we do that, let's stay in the normal for the time being and just introduce ourselves. And I'm going to start with you, Gail. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you, David. Welcome. I am Gail Nowak. I help spirit-led coaches and healers create authentic, healthy business relationships without hiding or silencing yourself so that you can communicate boldly, lead lovingly, and make the world a better place. And I do that using energy first, healing centered coaching approaches to lead you from hiding in plain sight to becoming a bold and gentle leader in the new earth paradigm.
Beautiful. A bold and gentle leader in the new earth paradigm.
Ooh.
That's quite a beautiful phrase. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I think you've probably said that before, but I think it's the first time I actually managed to say it back and reflect it the way I heard it. That's awesome. Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Jane. Most people call me Sarah. Occasionally, somebody calls me Jane. I'm in the UK. I also work with energy. I work with people to connect with and heal the hurt, pain, and trauma of their inner child. Work that has some of the experiences people have, the difference in people after they've had just a single session is phenomenal. I love seeing it. I really do. Energy is amazing. And at the end of the day, we are all energetic beings. We are all energy. We're all a vibration. And it's just about supporting people to bring their vibration back into sync. And so your comment you've just made, Gail, but for me, I suppose it's about helping people to remove that cloak of invisibility, especially if they've become people pleasers, sort of felt unwanted, unloved, not good enough, etc. And you've wanted to hide, but you've wanted to be seen. It's helping people to actually throw that cloak of invisibility away and help them feel seen by themselves. And that's the most important thing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. And Scott, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I am Scott Holmes, up here in Boston, and I am an intuitive healer. What does that mean? Well, much like Sarah, much like Gail, it starts with energy. And what I found in Sarah, you voiced it so beautifully, is the changes in people once they see themselves again. And the invisibility, I think, sometimes is in the heart and in the heart space. And when you can get somebody cleared, grounded, and centered, they can see themselves, and it's that person in the mirror. Who do they see? I often ask people, who do you see when you look in the mirror? And there's always a long pause because people don't necessarily like what they see. And so when I work with clients, it's to allow them to see themselves as they are, not with all of the programming that has gone on, not with all everything else that's gone on, and to be able to hear their inner voice. That inner voice that is so intuitive, that knowing voice that has been silenced for so long. So we're embracing the weird today. The shirt is one of my milder shirts, so I didn't want to go too crazy. But what is different? And that, for me, is the question. And when something else is weird, or we consider it weird, how do we judge it? And what do we allow in our lives through that judgment? And how do we see it? And that's
thank you.
How I wanted to kind of start that today. So, David, to you.
Well, I before we get there, I wanted to say you said something that I thought was kind of interesting. You said about something, asking people what do they see when they look in the mirror, and you said that often people don't like what they see. And what I have come to realize is the only reason someone doesn't like what he or she sees in the mirror is because they're not seeing the real person. They're seeing something else. They're seeing their own projection of weakness and imperfection and all those other things that I believe once you get past that, and Sarah talked about removing the cloak of invisibility. Well, it doesn't have to be a cloak of invisibility, any kind of a cloak, any kind of a costume, a mask, a covering that we put on to protect ourselves in order to create an illusion so other people can be more accepting. That is when we are living a false life. And when we are living a false life, then we are not happy with the results. That is guaranteed to be the case for every single one of us. We may get some satisfaction out of it for a period of time. It could be, like a temporary thing or something. For example, becoming very rich. That might be cool for a while. But that's not ultimately true satisfaction, and that's not ultimately what's going to make you happy. Right? And you're not necessarily going to like what you see when you look in the mirror because you're not being authentic. And so this is what we're really here to talk about today, actually. What does it mean? What is weird? What is normal? What is abnormal? What is, we're not here to say, we're not here to promote any particular way of being or anything like that. We are here to ask you to look at the truth of who you really are. And maybe that's the weirdest part of you. Weirdest in the sense that you're used to the other thing. So let's just dive in. And I think we're all a little weird. And before we even started this conversation, before I started the recording, we were diving into some really weird shit, if you forgive my French. But anyway, that's kind of what we're talking about here today. What does it mean to be normal? What is there such a thing? We use that word all the time. So yeah, there must be something related to that word normal. What does it mean? Anybody have any input for that?
All I would say is, what is normal and whose definition is it anyway? And it's all about a definition, isn't it? It's somebody else's perspective of what they perceive should be normal. And I suppose all the years as a people pleaser, that was very much a matter about trying to fit in. And since I woke up, it's a matter of, how can I just do what I want to do, be where I want to be, do the things I'd like to do? Sort of one of the first things I did was go and walk with wolves and then become a trainee handler with them. And wow, what an amazing experience to be able to do, but something I wouldn't have done for fear of what other people thought. That led me to go on to a trip to Romania to track wolves and lynx in the Carpathians with the Carpathian Large Carnivore Project. We hold ourselves back by being worried about what other people think about us and about the things we might be thinking about doing, when actually, if they do make any sort of judgment, it's potentially because they're actually jealous or envious of the fact that we've got the courage to say, I don't care what you think, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm doing. I remember my mother's reaction when I said I was going to abseil off the water tower local to here. You can't do that. Why the heck can't I? It's my life to live. It's not for me. And so if you want to call that abnormal, weird, whatever, then that is exactly what I became. I became true to who I am. And that's really important. Plus the fact, then I'm sure we'll come into it later, we are all wired slightly differently. We're all unique beings, and it's really important for us to be true to that uniqueness.
Yeah, So I like what you were talking about, this idea of normal. I wanted to just inject something here. The word normal has many, many applications in the scientific world. And I would just like to draw your attention to one mathematical use of that terminology. You've heard of the bell curve, I'm sure, the Gaussian curve. And it's basically used in statistics to say, it's a bell-shaped thing that goes something like that, And right here in the center is where 96% of the statistical data happen to fall in within a certain level of confidence. As you start moving out, you increase your level of confidence and everything fits into the entire curve, but only small percentages fit into the very outsides of the curve, either on the extreme right or on the extreme left. So this is a whole process called Gaussian statistics, all right? And anything in that band that I talked about is considered normal. Anything outside that band has various other terminologies. We sometimes call it abnormal. We call it, outliers. We call it all kinds of things like that. So this idea of the curved structure can be applied to pretty much everything, including human behavior. All right. And so we have what we classify as normal human behavior. And we all know what normal human behavior is, and anything that's outside of that, we say, whoa, that's not really normal. And we notice the stuff that is outside of the normal. We notice it. And this is where our judgment comes in. Sometimes we'll call it weird. Sometimes we'll call it crazy. Sometimes we'll call it insanity. We will come up with our own terms to describe that because it's not normal. And it makes us uncomfortable. And that's what you were talking about, Sarah, this idea that anything that's abnormal is really just something that makes us uncomfortable, although you didn't say it in quite those words, but that's essentially what I think you were saying. So I wanted to just get that out there and say, statistical tools are great for helping us to measure things, but they're not meant to be things for fitting stuff in. That's the problem that we see people using statistics for. Oh, well, you have to fit it into this curve. No, you don't. The curve is there as a device for measuring. That's all it's there for. So don't abuse it. Scott, I saw you looked like you were about ready to say something, so I wanted to pass the floor over to you.
There's so much of these. I was going down a list of some of the things that I've done, and I'm sure we all have those. And I was told to go to by a medium I was working with. I was told that I had to go to Penang, Malaysia. That I had to. Now, an unseen voice told someone who I had worked with that I should go 2,500 miles away. 24-hour difference. Yeah, 24-hour difference. A day later, dollar short, and that I had to go to this Burmese temple in Penang, and I went, and it was one of the most extraordinary kind of trips of my life, and really left me changed. Much like going to India and sitting in the Himalayas and walking through Indian culture, going to Peru, which isn't, when you're here in the States, Peru isn't all that bad from going from here. But it's that doing those things that I can do now, climbing Machu Picchu and slogging through the Andes, and for whatever reason, mountains call to me. But there aren't many people that are clamoring to do those things. And so the people in the vibration that I have, those same people, I think weird is seen from the outside. When you're hanging with people who are in the same vibration in life, no matter when that is, and our vibration changes as we grow, as we hopefully evolve. It changes, but it's not weird when you're in the middle of it. For those of you who are listening to this, have you found your dragon? Have you been introduced to them? Have you been introduced to your unicorn? Have you seen?
Wait a minute. Now you're really getting weird.
I hope so. We all know people who talk to dragons, who see the world through dragons. We know through different energies and how they manifest. And with Sarah, with light language, that she can't necessarily explain it, but she does it, and it's beautiful. And when you hear it, you can understand it. I do understand it. I get a meaning from it. And is that weird? I don't know. But if you're open,
but certainly not normal.
For an awful lot more people than you think, actually.
It is in her life. It absolutely is in her life. And she brought it into mine. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make in the roundabout way is, if you are open, normal changes for you. If you are open to the experiences, normal changes, and judgment falls away. And that's where defining how you see the world, broader it is, the less weird it is, the more that's included.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, Gail. Oh, before you go, Gail, I just wanted to say to both Denise and Ricky, who are here, thank you for joining us. And if you have comments or questions, feel free to post them in the chat there. And I see Ricky's already been doing that. So thank you. I appreciate that. And we'll do our best to answer your questions as we proceed. Thank you, Gail. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. You know what's weird? I was going to address them too.
There you go.
So there you go. We're all on the same wavelength. Yeah. And Ricky just said, I think we have to listen with our hearts and not just our ears. I love that. It's beautiful. I want to go. Oh, you guys went first. So that was great. You gave me some talking points. As you were talking about statistics, David, and normal and the bell curve, what came to me was that really what feels more true to me is that we have a collective agreement around what's typical or common, which is different than normal, right? Or I think so. I think that's different than normal. Also, what came to me, just as a point of interest, when I was in college, I was taking a journalism class, and one of the books for that class was called How to Lie with Statistics. That's the title of the book. So, there's a place for things that are measured and practical, and even those normal, typical methods can be manipulated. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yep.
And then the other thing that I wanted to share is I used to throw this weird term around all the time. And so, sometimes it just rolls off the tongue like, oh my God, wasn't that so weird? And I started recently practicing, instead of saying weird, saying wild. That sometimes we have experiences in our life that are wild in the sense of amazement, but also wild in the sense of wilderness. Nature is not necessarily all neat and tidy. It's wild. And supernatural is a part of nature, and that can be a wild experience. So, I appreciate what Scott was saying about being called to the mountains. And I think that we can kind of all relate to those experiences of being drawn to certain things without necessarily having the logic behind it. And being willing to listen with our hearts, like Ricky said, and kind of surrender our need to understand, to know. And to me, like, embracing the weird actually feels really fun and playful. It's like playing with the universe. Um, I was taking a walk a few years ago with my kids, and so my kids at that time were kind of in the tween age, so they've lost a little bit of that wonder and really not caring what other people think. And I told them to touch a tree because I had an experience maybe a few months before that where I touched a tree and I actually felt that the energy was like, and I played on trees and I was out in the woods all the time when I was a kid. And this was the first time as an adult that I intentionally connected with a tree, put my hands on a tree and felt that energy. And so I told my kids to do that. And of course, they were like, "Oh, Mom, you're so weird. What if somebody sees you? You're like the village witch." So it starts young, right? This judgment that we're talking about. And for me, it's like just being curious about the world and like, wow, why is it that I feel something when I connect with this tree? And there's actually a whole book about the secret life of plants that I discovered after that. And I was like, oh, okay. Plants are sentient. They have life force energy. And so then it becomes a little less weird, right? Because we have some sort of explanation behind it. But like we said at the beginning of the program, everything is energy.
Yeah. So that's beautiful. I love what you were saying. To say plants are sentient, that sounds weird. And yet it is such an obvious truth. When we think about it, how could it not be true? It's like, you mentioned that for you, normal is nothing more than a collective agreement. I think that's a great way to describe it, honestly. But you could say the same thing about any specific fact that you choose to name. For example, I see Scott is wearing a blue shirt with big feathers on it. Well, is that a fact or is that just my interpretation? Is it really blue or is that just an agreement that we've made on a particular color frequency? I mean, to my eyes, that's what it looks like. It looks like a blue shirt with, feathers and flowers and maybe some other stuff on it. Is that really what it is? Would it be, if we all agreed that that's what it is, does that make it a fact? You see what I'm getting at? Facts themselves can be subject to interpretation. There are so many facts out there that we're told, well, you can't say this because this fact disproves that or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous when the fact itself was subject to some kind of a group consensus. See what I'm saying? So what we really have to understand is that everything in our world, everything in our physical world, is a collective agreement of sorts. And so anything that deviates from that collective agreement is what gets us agitated and into a place of arguing with each other and even creating wars about it. It's complete insanity. Another judgment, by the way. That's my judgment. My judgment. I own it. But it's normal to have that judgment. I'm pushing the buttons today. I'm going nuts on these button pushing things. But anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. And there are so many things that we as human beings do not really understand until we get out of our heads, out of our ego minds, and start getting down into our hearts and souls and start feeling the world from an energetic perspective. We've already talked about this. Everything is energy. Everything is pure consciousness, is really what it boils down to. Pure consciousness is the field from which all experiences emanate and then return to. So, I don't know. What is weird? We still haven't come anywhere close to a definition. I don't think we will, but that's part of the point of this conversation, isn't it?
Isn't it about the fact that it's almost about disproving that there is anything that we could actually put that term weird to? Because for me, having spent time working with children and adults with learning difficulties, and obviously they are considered to be abnormal, but it's not. I remember, and we've changed the term here. It used to be mentally handicapped. It's now learning difficulty or learning disability. But when I first came into contact with people who were mentally handicapped, that was at a much younger age for me. But when I started working with people that were considered slightly different and in need of considerably more help to live a normal life, I had remembered thinking as a child, who's got the learning difficulty? Who's got the handicap? And I don't like the term them and us, but because it was a group having a holiday in my parents' hotel, they were a group of older ladies that were being taken care of by nuns because they had this mentally handicapped thing. And I was really thinking, well, who's got the handicap? I'm working in my parents' hotel. I'm probably 12, 13, 14, whatever it is. I'm doing paper rounds. I'm having to go out and earn my money to put clothes on my back. Yes. And as I actually went out to work full time, then give my mother money towards food in the house as well. You know, who's got the handicap? And I decided actually the so-called normal people had got the handicap, because we're the ones that had to go out and earn a living. These people were being totally taken care of. Now, I appreciate there's considerably more to it than that. And obviously, no one knows what's going on in their mind, their frustrations. You know, sort of they're getting really frustrated with the things that they can't do, that they can watch other people do. But for me, I remember saying to this one young lady, and she was in her 30s, and saying to her, it's your normal. That is your normal. How you live your life is your normal. And nobody should tell you any differently. How I live my life is my normal. How each and every one of us live our lives, unless we are allowing others to control it, is our normal, should be our normal for us.
Well, even if other people have been allowed to control us, for us, that is normal.
Yeah. But then we do have the control to turn around and say, not anymore.
Exactly.
And maybe that is when we start setting our boundaries, and that's when people start calling us weird and all the rest of it, because they can't control us anymore. Suddenly, we are stepping outside of their normal. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying about the bell curve, but I think everybody's life is their own normal. And it is so important and having worked with the groups that I've worked with, it's so about stepping out of any form of judgment of people's capabilities, because we're all good at some things and not at others.
You know, you talk about people with handicaps. I remember when I was still living in Edmonton, Alberta, I was still married to my first wife at the time. My kids, we had a lady who was a nanny who happened to also be a foster parent. And she took care of mostly kids that couldn't find homes anywhere else. And this included people who had, one of her foster kids was he had fetal alcohol syndrome. He had been born to a mother who was an alcoholic, and he just had really, really severe brain damage. But he was just such a sweet, caring individual, even though he had very low IQ in terms of normal, and he just had some very, very strange, quirky behaviors. But what I realized is okay, that's the way his life is. That's, for whatever reason, this soul has chosen this form of life to perhaps experience something that the rest of us don't get to experience, But it certainly woke me up to the idea that, handicap isn't necessarily the right terminology. Disability of some kind might be the right choice or whatever. And by the way, have you ever met a person who had Down syndrome? I've met quite a few of those people. And, I remember when I was a kid, when I was very young, 7 or 8 years old, I remember them referring to those kinds of people as mongoloids, which is a horrible terminology, and so the word itself scared me. And so I tended to stay away from them, But as I got older and I had the opportunity to actually interact with people like that, I discovered these are some of the most loving people around. They don't have the same filters that normal people have. And so they just want to love everybody. Man, what the hell's wrong with that? Maybe we need more. No, I don't. I don't want to say that. That's not a proper thing to say. But we need more people who are willing to embrace the true essence of love within them, whether they have Down syndrome or not. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I want to speak to this too, because this is you just brought up a memory for me, David, that I'm actually a little surprised I've forgotten. One of my close dear friends growing up, her brother had fetal alcohol syndrome, and I'm a kid growing up in the 80s, and so I witnessed all kinds of unfair treatment towards him. And he's exactly what you were talking about, just so loving, like so excited to, see me and see other people. And, boundaries might have been a little bit of an issue, but like, it was like when you could connect from your heart, right? And just see that pure love, the purity in this individual. And he still, I know he still asks my family about me, he still asks about, and it's kind of remarkable to me. I also have a client who I've been working with for the past year that is, it's a college, and the program that I'm supporting is college students with learning disabilities and mental disabilities, and some of them are on the autism spectrum. And it's the same thing, number one, we're all human. I think going into that, I don't have special education training. I don't have like a lot of the technical things needed, but I think that part of the reason why they decided to pull me in to work with these students is the patience and the compassion, and to just see the humanity and the purity in these young adults who are wanting to really discover who they are and what they're capable of, and have an experience that normal people get to have. And it's just talk about transformation, watching transformation unfold. Really opened my eyes to, and taught me so much about my own judgments, my own triggers, how to be more patient with not only individuals that maybe don't see and experience the world like I do, but also like from that intellectual standpoint. But some of the ways that I learned to show up in that environment, specifically because I knew I was working with differently abled people, taught me how to come back home and deal with friends, family members, strangers in a very different way. Much more compassion, much more patience, much more clarity. So in my opinion, I feel like, I don't know how familiar people are with the term light worker, but the kids that I work with, they're light workers, in my opinion.
Yeah, beautiful. Scott, did you have something?
Yeah, Gail, thank you for kind of triggering that. I had a cousin growing up who was deaf. I have a grandson who was on the spectrum. I have a niece who's on the spectrum, and my parents couldn't deal with any of it. They didn't understand it. They, everything in their world was very, very typical.
Right.
The way they grew up, and so that I go back to acceptance and compassion and to broadening. When I was in management and I was hiring, I would hire people who were very divergent backgrounds, that they just didn't fit the mold, but very divergent. I always found that the strength in any of the organizations I was in was that they saw things differently. When you have everybody thinking the same way, you're going to get blindsided by things you never even thought about. But they saw things an entirely different way. They had different perspectives, and it grew the strength of the organization. For me, we just grew it exponentially, because they would come up with ideas I would never, ever, ever think of. They would see things much, much differently than I did. We were looking at, sales and statistics and everything else and trying to make sense of them. But when you get down to it, the guys on the street that I had hired, who all came from different backgrounds, would have different perspectives. And that to me is always a strength. And so when we talk about weird, I think it is, they can do it. I wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't. But that makes them weird because they will do it. Well, it's acceptance of. It's acceptance, plain and simple. I used to have a judge that sat right here on my shoulder, all the time. Harsh, and I was very judgmental when I was younger. My gosh. And I didn't realize how harsh I came across. My daughters told me that I expected more out of them than I expected out of anybody. And that's how they grew up. But that's how I judge myself also. So now that I'm much kinder to myself, I'm also much kinder to everybody around me. And that acceptance, that compassion, that love, that perspective of it really makes things less weird.
Right. Yeah. I think, so this is a really, really, really great and deep topic for sure. But I want to come back to something that you said earlier, Gail. You talked about boundaries. And I think that we need to understand that each of us has certain boundaries that we have. Those boundaries obviously can shift from moment to moment, as we've talked about before. But essentially, what I kind of embrace, what I try to embrace with people is, you go ahead and do whatever the hell you want to do, as long as it doesn't violate my boundaries or my rights or my space without my permission. I think if we could all learn to live that way, I think this world would be a whole hell of a lot better place, honestly. But unfortunately, we also have, and this is coming back to your collective agreement concept, we have structures called societies, and societies have rules and regulations and, physical kind of boundaries that they create in order to keep us all behaving in what they classify as a normal manner, right? Anything that deviates from that kind of behavior can be met with penalties, punishment, whatever. You could be thrown in jail. All these things can happen. And so we do have to adapt ourselves to some extent if we wish to live in these societal structures. So these are all really important features of our conversation that we haven't really touched on very much. And yet, I think we've kind of touched on them. You know what I'm saying? We've touched on them peripherally. We haven't really gotten into them in a deep way. And I think personally, we're all in agreement with that basic idea that of letting people have as much freedom as possible to do whatever it is they choose to do, as long as they don't violate someone else. That's really kind of what it boils down to. And I also understand that groups of people are going to have different ideas about what's considered acceptable and so forth. And therefore, they are going to put these regulations, rules, limitations in place to try and keep everyone safe, even though safety is a complete illusion, as I have talked about many times before. I cannot keep you safe no matter what I do. All I can do is I can, at best, maybe keep myself safe. And even at that, all that safety is just an alternative word for fear. That's all it is. If I am worried about safety, it's because I'm afraid of something happening to me, or happening to my kids, or happening to, somebody I love. That's the only reason I'm worried about safety. And people don't like to admit being afraid. That's why they like to use the word safe. Anyway, that's just me ranting again. Sorry.
Can I check something weird in here then?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I have channeled from many mythical beings, including the werewolf and the vampire. So here we go, werewolf and vampire. They have both told me that they are guardians of the night. They are not, you're not to fear them. They're not here for you to be afraid of them. They're here to be protectors and supporters. And so it was the vampire that came through first. And it was just like, if you're walking through a graveyard or past a graveyard and you're feeling afraid, just call on me. Now, who in the right mind with the way that vampires are portrayed is going to call on the vampire to protect them? But we are beings of the night. We can see where you can't see. We know that you are safe. And with the werewolf, it was also, yes, I'm another being of the night. But it was also a matter of, we have given you your own guardian wolf. And you are one with your wolf. Now, where is the Old English term for man? Man, wolf. You are one with your guardian wolf. Well, having worked with wolves, I haven't just got one, but then that's just me being greedy. Because I've got 3 of them with me that are no longer in the physical, but I've worked with them. So in the physical world. So Kodiak, Kenai, and Alba. And I've no doubt some of the others come in because they're not here anymore because it's over 20 years since I worked with them. But if you're somebody who sees, hears, senses, feels, whatever all the clairs, there's nothing weird about you. It is just, that is how you're wired. That's how you're meant to be. And that's who you are for this lifetime. And if there are going to be those people who think that that is weird, that's their perception of what's going on with you. I don't actually see things or hear things. When it came to the messages, I had to sit with pen and paper and I had to just see what came out. And that's what came with those 2. The dragons also told me, all of them have said, do not share our myths and legends. So many of them have been distorted to create fear. And they're here as our guides and guardians. Some of them, like the gremlin, have very peculiar ways of doing it. But listen, because seriously, if they make your computers and whatever go strange, my printer one time would not print. And I was trying to print off leaflets for an event. And then I discovered there was a major error in it. And I was going to be printing off 50 of these things. And it stopped. Once I corrected the error, it printed. So be open. As I said, I don't see things, I don't hear things, but I do trust And even with working with the energy, I'm a truster. And sometimes I get a real sense of knowing. That if that sounds weird, peculiar, whatever, but there's an awful lot of you there who you just have this sense of knowing. But there are others that may hear voices, may see things. You may be aware of the dragons and the angels and the unicorns, etc., that are surrounding people. That makes you a seer. Just because majority of people can't do it doesn't make you weird. It makes you your normal. There you go. There's a bit of weird for you.
Love it. Love it. And I love that you introduced another word that we hadn't talked about, which is peculiar. What I find interesting is those words are adjective words, which means that they are meant to describe something, and we come up with a word to describe something. But have you ever thought about this? In my mind, every adjective is just a judgment word. That's all it is. If I happen to choose the word peculiar, that's just me judging using that word. If I choose the word normal, that's me judging using another word. In either case, I'm still judging. I'm making my own interpretation, my own conclusion, my own evaluation, and all of that. All of these adjectives are judgment words. And I will go as far as to say many nouns are judgment words too. So, but we use them as ways of helping us to communicate with one another on this physical plane, even though if we could elevate ourselves to a high enough level, then the words would no longer be necessary. We'd be able to communicate through direct experience rather than through some kind of limited form of communication, right? And it would not be, I mean, how long does it take me to say a sentence? Well, maybe a half a second or a quarter of a second per word, something like that. Well, that time adds up, right? But if I could elevate myself to a high enough level and you could do the same, then I would it'd be done. And everybody would know exactly what I just did, right? So I don't know. That would be weird. Well, maybe not weird. It would be interesting for sure. And and that's another thing, Gail, you talked about substituting the word wild for weird. What I'm trying to do for myself is rather than use any kind of judgment word, I just simply ask, wow, isn't that interesting? Mm. Interesting, of course, is just another adjective, and it's therefore another judgment word, but it has less energy associated with it and more curiosity kind of associated with it. You know what I mean? So I try to, if I can do it on a regular enough basis, I'll say, wow, that's an interesting idea. Where did that come from? And what does it mean? Does it mean anything?
So,
yeah, I think that openness and curiosity opens up possibilities, right? And so the judgment just shuts things down. And I wanted to go back to something that Sarah said that Ricky, and then Ricky said something earlier, and I don't remember exactly what it was, Sarah, that reminded me of Ricky's comment of what you think of me is none of my business. And similarly, or maybe it was you, David, maybe it was something you were saying. Yeah, when we think about, I think it was what you were saying, David. Not only is it what you think of me as none of my business, it's also if we were all minding our own business, and I'm not saying that in a flip way, I'm actually being quite literal about it. When we mind our own business, what does that look like? Instead of worrying about what everybody else is doing or judging or criticizing, it's a very different experience of the world. And I feel like you do open up to these things that seem weird, interesting, curious, peculiar. You start to see and experience more of that because you're not blocking that energy through judgment or through gossip or criticizing, or always looking externally rather than inward, like, well, how do I feel about this experience? What do I think about this? Isn't this curious? What would happen if I did this thing? Sarah, you talked about, the guardians of the night. And I recently was on vacation. And before that vacation, I worked with a colleague to be very intentional, because I felt like I was being called to go to Croatia. And I knew there was something more than just a family vacation. And so in that session together, some travel guides came up, and the whole theme of that session was to call on your travel guides, lean on them, have fun with them, experiment. And so I did that through the whole vacation, and it just blew me wide open. Just ask for big things, little things, all the things in between, and felt completely supported by this group of travel guides. Now, I don't typically work with guides. I'm typically like straight line to creator energy. Like, up until this point, I kind of had some hangups about that. Like, I don't know who I'm calling in, but I now have ways to feel more comfortable working through source to call in different guides. So that opened up a new possibility, new horizons for me, right? And so if I was too busy judging her and being like, oh, guides, I don't know where that's coming from, I would have had a completely different vacation and experience.
So what you think of me is none of my business. It's a great bumper sticker aphorism. And I think what it's designed to do is to remind me that you're going to have your thoughts about me while, I'm not really paying attention. And in that sense, it's useful. But there are times when what you think of me is my business, and I do want to hear it. And so if you have some real genuine feedback for me that is coming from a place of love, then I do want to hear that. If it's just coming from a place of judgment, then thank you, but you can wait until another time. So I think we have to take all of these wonderful little phrases with a grain of salt and understand their purpose. I've created thousands of them in my lifetime, and I'm sure you all have too. You've had these little phrases that have come up, and maybe you've learned them from someone else, or maybe you made them up yourself. It doesn't matter. And they were useful in the moment when they came up. I invite us all to take statements like that and meditate on them and say, well, what does this really mean? Does it mean anything? Is it true? It may be true, it may not be true, and it might be useful in certain contexts and not useful in others. It's useful, I believe, just to meditate on it. Spend some time contemplating what it is and ask myself, what does this mean for me? How can I use this? How can I elevate myself out to a higher level by embracing this? That's kind of how I approach it. Scott, I know you had something you wanted to say, so why don't you go? Oh, and I also, Gail, I noticed I know that you said you had to leave early. Did you want to say any final words before you leave?
Oh, Scott, thank you for your graciousness. I know I stepped ahead in line when you wanted to say something earlier, and here I am again. Let's see, some final parting thoughts before I jump off. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, this experience is a playground. Like, let's have some fun with these concepts, right? Like, maybe you don't believe in dragons or unicorns or clairaudience or any of the clairs, but hey, why not play with it? Why not experiment with it? There's no loss in just getting curious about these things. And I think also one of the intentions for this episode was to kind of normalize, right? These experiences, having conversations about things that we can't necessarily explain in the context of how the world currently works, right? And if you think about that, I was thinking about this morning in kind of just thinking about this show coming up. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, the things that exist today would have been weird back then. So I would encourage those who are listening and tuning in to be open, be curious, have some fun with it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gail. We'll see you next
Thank
time.
you. I gotta run. Great conversation.
Always.
Go ahead, Scott.
No, I just wrote a piece on curiosity. And for me, curiosity is so powerful if we use it right. If we give ourselves permission to be curious rather than judgment, shut everything off. Oh, I know about that. Never mind. No, it's nothing I'm interested in. So I show up in my life. I try to show up for different things. Something I wouldn't necessarily be interested in. Somebody says, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Yeah, let me experience that. I have a friend of mine who's into folk music, the old style. All these guitarists that I've never ever heard of, singing songs I've never heard, and he doesn't have anybody to go to the concerts with him, so I go with him. And I've heard some amazing stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have heard because he's opened my my mind to a lot of other things, not just stuff you hear on the radio, but things that aren't as popular or in the normal vein of things. So curiosity, one thing I would put out there for everybody is, rather than judgment, be curious about things, because you don't know. You see things, people do things in their life, but you don't know until you ask the why, the what, and they're like everybody else. We're all struggling to make the best of quality of our lives, and they had to make judgments in order to be where they are. So that curiosity. And David, we never got into the matrices and the matrix aspect of things, which would have really
right,
brought
the
us to
simulation idea. Yeah, that's a whole going to be another topic, I think.
I think that should be
wanted
just
to-
a topic itself.
Right. I wanted to acknowledge, Ricky was saying that how funny how those messages come through if we are listening. And she said when she first heard a message like that, it gave her permission to come out of her shell of fearing that people wouldn't like her. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. Learning how to not care so much what other people think, because in reality, for 90% of the people around you aren't even thinking about you. And if they do, they usually think about you in pretty positive ways most of the time. This is something that I've learned for myself. And, it's made my life so much easier just to have that freedom to say, oh, you might have a judgment about me and it doesn't matter. Great. Anyway, Sarah, I know you got to get going too, so I'm going to give you the option to close us out first.
How about a little bit of light language, especially with our topic?
Okay.
For those who've never heard this before, I have no idea what I'm saying. I can't translate it. It's not for your mind, your ears. It's for your heart and your soul. Yishtaniki kaham. Natarata ishniaka. To se ash. Nehai nikichi. Hena e akshtaneke me. Soromakata ai inoicha. Te taranake shiamanakataya. No te nishe. Kantarake shianakataya. Moena tarana e shiamanaiki. To e na e shianakate. To echea le astana koinichi. Tone a eleki ichiamanaikai. To eche ti a Komarata e Shiniakata. Namaste.
Beautiful. Thank you. Scott, final words from you.
Embrace the weird. You are an individual. You are an individual. You are made up. You are one of the collective, but you are an individual. Embrace whatever weirdness there is in you fully. It sets you free. It changes your life. It will give you a better quality of life if you're true to your authentic self.
Beautiful. Yes, I love that. So embrace the weird and trust that there's absolute gifts and beauty in everything in your life, even if it seems abnormal or unusual or unexpected. There's beauty everywhere. So my friends, thank you for joining us for today's episode of Soul Empowerment. You can catch recordings of this and every other episode on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com. Until next time, this is David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. I'll see you next time on Soul Empowerment. Bye-bye.